Hello, BookTube. This is Weekly Reads. I've had a pretty good reading week this week. I started the reading week with a work of history, The Horde, How the Mongols Changed the World by Marie Favereau. This is a reassessment, a reexamination of the Horde. More specifically, or another name for them, is the Golden Horde. The Horde was a constituent autonomous part of the larger Mongol Empire formed by Genghis Khan in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Um, the Horde was what is now was located from Siberia in the east and what is now Uzbekistan in the east, and stretched to what is now Ukraine in the west, or a little bit beyond Ukraine in the west. The Horde was initially a autonomous part of the larger Mongol Empire under the rule of the Jochids, or more specifically the Batuids. They were Batu was the grandson of Genghis Khan, and Jochi was Genghis Khan's oldest son. So it's basically Jochi had this territory. He died before Genghis did, and so the khanship or the rulership of this stretch of land and the hordes that um, populated it were split between Batu, the youngest son or of a specific wife, and his older brother Orda. And so they basically eventually split, with Batu focusing primarily on the Volga and Orda more near Uzbekistan. And so the Horde looks at how the Mongols, and the Horde in particular, um, focused on economics, on controlling trade routes and merchants, and using trade to gain luxury items that Mongol elites favored, that they could then redistribute to their followers in a sort of a sharing economy. The book also looks at how the Horde interacted with the peoples they dominated, how they ruled them, uh, how they taxed them, also how the Horde engaged in diplomacy, particularly with um, the Mamluks in Egypt, the Byzantines, the Genoese, the Venetians, and also greater Mongol politics. So I really enjoyed the book. It was quite good. With my only critique being that the book falters with how the Horde fell or dissipated. It largely eventually broke up in the 15th century and early 16th century uh, by splitting up into more autonomous hordes that were eventually conquered or annexed by the growing Russian Empire. But I mean, besides that, I largely enjoyed the book. On Monday, I started my back to school reading project, a project in which I drew inspiration from school subjects to determine a TBR. Many of the books are ones that I've been meaning to get to for quite a while, and one of the fun things about booktube events or personal reading projects is being able to use themes or prompts or whatever to create a TBR that's that has a lot of books that you've been meaning to get to for a while and just haven't. And so the first subject I had in my schedule, or TBR, was history. And for history, I selected The Sot-Weed Factor by John Barth. This is a postmodern historical satire about a fifth-rate English poet named Ebenezer Cook, who migrates to the Maryland colony in the late 17th century. And it's basically he goes there to write an epic poem about Maryland and has a whole slew of misadventures. From my tone, you will probably guess what I think of it. I did not like what I read of it. The style was dull and rather plodding. The characters are just tiresome. And the book's 800 pages, and I'm like, do I want to spend a week and a half with this book, with this style, with these characters? And my answer was nope, so I bailed. Which is a bit frustrating because I remember rather liking John Barth's novella collection Chimera when I read it 15 years ago, maybe slightly more than that or less. It's been around 15 years since I read it. I picked it up in San Francisco in 2006, so I think it's been at least 12 years since I read it. It was basically 3 novellas, 2 of which dealt with Greek mythology or retold Greek mythology, Medusa and Bellerophon. And then the third one, or it was a frame I don't quite remember, was about Scheherazade of the 1001 Nights. So I remember quite liking it. And at the time I was still in my English professor, scholar phase, so I wanted to read more of Barth's work and saw this at Golden's and picked it up, and had never gotten around to it until this reading project, and I don't like it. So that was disappointing. Equally disappointing, although given the subject I selected it for, shouldn't be any surprise because I never have gotten on with computer science. It's never been one of my strong suits. But I did just select computer science so I would have an excuse to read this book because I've been meaning to get to this book forever and wanting to get to it forever. And unfortunately, I didn't get on with it either. And that was Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. This is a seminal, one of the most important cyberpunk novels, which is a subgenre of science fiction and fantasy that looks at, which is usually near future set, and deals with computers and punk, whatever punk is. So Snow Crash itself is about hero protagonist. He is a part-time hacker working, an information broker working for a merged and privatized CIA Library of Congress, who gets involved in an attempt by some rogue actors to weaponize discoveries about the ancient Sumerian language that ties it to the myth of the Tower of Babel. I like the idea of cyberpunk. I like the aesthetics of cyberpunk. I like the postmodern elements of cyberpunk, but I just, particularly here, I did not find the style all that interesting. It's rather standard. It's rather overly descriptive, particularly with the tech. I mean, the first two chapters are set, or basically, Hero at this point is a pizza delivery boy, and in narration features exhaustive descriptions of tech of delivering pizzas. And it's like, even if you've never driven a pizza delivery truck before, a car, or you've never delivered pizzas professionally, pretty much all of us know what it would be like to deliver pizza. So, do we really need that exhaustive of a description? Even if this is a more high tech version of it, which was a bit silly, honestly. And it just, it's one of those things, I think, with me and older science fiction that they just don't age well for me. And this book is a great example of that. Kind of the description of the pizza delivery, um, some of the hints of wider world building, which even when this book was written, kind of like, well, I mean, like the Soviet Union mentions, the mafia, apparently they own pizza chains or something, which, yeah. Anyway, so it bugged me, and yeah. Which has pretty much my non-success with this book, and the rather poor successes I've had with, or non-successes I've had with a lot of the science fiction and fantasy I've been wanting to read this year has largely depressed me. And I'll talk a bit about that later, but I just so annoyed. Move that over there because it's going somewhere else. Okay, so I finished one book, build on two, but I had enough time this week to try a third. And the third book or the third subject for my back to school reading project was Spanish. And for Spanish, I picked Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. And I am very pleased to say that I like this book. I didn't necessarily love it, and it's more than okay. I really liked it. It's fascinating. So, and I'm surprised by that because I would have thought from the style, from the and some of the narration, I would think I would not like it as much as I do, but I quite like it. Hurricane Season is about the murder of a transgender witch in the small fictional Mexican town of La Matosa. Um, the novel is 8 chapters long. The first two and the last two form a bit of a framework that sort of looks at the wider picture of the community, of the witch, of what happens later. And then the middle chapters, chapters 3, 4, 5, and 6, tell the story from 4 different points of view. A witness to the crime, an accomplice to the crime, uh, one of the causes of the crime, and one of the perpetrators. Um, and so I don't quite want to give a whole lot of spoilers, even though I'm pretty sure. I mean, Hurricane Season did make the rounds of BookTube a few years ago when it was first published. So I don't know exactly how much information to give. So the first chapter is from the point of view of Yesenia. She is the oldest granddaughter of a woman named Donatina. Her cousin Murillo, or also known as Luismi, is involved in the murder. And Yesenia has a deeply antagonistic relationship with her cousin. In fact, the whole family's relationship is incredibly toxic and abusive and brutal, which is typical of the whole story. This book is incredibly bleak and brutal, and the characters are all sorts of toxic. Um, and Yesenia sees her brother, her cousin, and another man going into the witch's house. Shortly afterwards, the witch's body is found, and she informs the police. So, the second chapter, or the second point of view, is from Munra, Murillo's stepfather, who is pretty much a sad sack of a man, whose life's gone downhill since he's had an accident that left him crippled. The third point of view is Norma, Murillo's girlfriend, who ran away from home because she became impregnated by her stepfather. Again, in an incredibly toxic, abusive family relationship. And the abortion that Norma takes, she takes a abortifacient, or a medically induced abortion provided by the witch, sets Murillo off on wanting to kill the witch, which had been suggested numerous times by his friend Brando, who's the fourth narrator, who's a young man who hangs out with Murillo and who grows to have an obsession with the slightly older young man. And again, he comes from a toxic background, and he himself is deeply, deeply troubled. And it's just, this book is gloriously brutal. I really, really enjoyed it. Not necessarily to the level of loving it, but I really liked it. So, that was what I read this week. Now, the next two subjects for my back to school reading project are math and science. And for both, I decided for science fiction. Because obviously science, you would do science fiction, and for math, well, science needs math, so that works. And I really except for poetry, but that's, I was entirely happy with that, so science fiction. So I will start the reading week for math with The Best of Leigh Brackett. This is a short story collection that collects a lot of Leigh Brackett's best works, or at least whatever the editor thinks is her best works. I've read some of Leigh Brackett's work, and I like some of it, but some of it I'm also not too fond of, so I don't know how I'm going to respond with that collection. And for science, I'll be reading Tomorrow's Kin by Nancy Kress. This is a book that I picked up largely because I read a writing guide by Nancy Kress a few years ago, and I've always wanted to see how writers who write writing guides or writing books implement their own teachings, or how they write themselves. So I've been meaning to get to this book for a while. Now, given that these are both science fiction, and I'm having really bad luck with science fiction lately, I don't know. Hopefully I will like them. But there's a possibility that I will bail on them, which case I will go on with the rest of my reading project. And I'll talk a bit about that next week, whether or not these are successful or I read more. Anyway, but yeah, just it's depressing, really, my lack of success with science fiction the last few years, particularly given that I identify as a science fiction and fantasy fan, and the more I don't have that I just don't like what I'm reading, which could entirely be I buy things randomly without much and just don't have success with it, or my tastes are changing, and have changed, which is also entirely possible. But it is rather disappointing. I mean, it's depressing and does put me into a bad mood. But anyway, enough of that. So that's my reading plans for next week. And I'll obviously report back whether or not I am successful with these two, or if I bail and move on to art, drama, and English, which are the final three classes I have for my schedule. So, anyway, what else is up? I've been reading, I haven't been reading, I've been watching The Sandman, the Netflix adaptation of the classic comic book series by Neil Gaiman, and I am loving it. I'm almost finished with the series. I will finish it tonight. I've got 2 more episodes left, and it's a fantastic series. If you have Netflix and if you are at all interested in The Sandman, do check it out. Yeah, so I think that's about it, except for, of course, news that Salman Rushdie was attacked earlier today, and hopefully he recovers from his injuries. And yeah, and hopefully next week will be a much better week. I don't know, it's just this week's been a bit of a downer, even though I read 2 books that I quite like. It's been a downer. Anyway, so I know I didn't make any videos Thursday or Wednesday and Thursday when I was meaning to do some extra tag videos, but the tag video I was going to do on Wednesday, I needed to do a bit more work on. Well, both of them, because I realized one of the tags involved a lot more thinking than I had originally planned for, and the other one had some what exactly? Oh yeah, I kind of forgot what I was wanting to, like, some of the films, because it's a film was the film to book to film adaptation book tag that I wanted to do, and I forgot some of the films I wanted to talk about, and also I kind of flubbed the casting, which makes sense because I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to current actors and that sort of thing. So anyway, but hopefully this coming booktube week I will have more videos up, because I do like making videos. So hopefully some tags, some discussion videos, and a few other things. So we'll see how it turns out. But anyway, booktube is all I've got for you today. So thank you. Have a great rest of your evening and weekend, and I will see you hopefully on Monday. So until then, booktube, thank you and stay safe.